Hello to all those watching and listening to the Food for the Faithful channel with me, your reluctant prophet, Bill Reimer. Today we're going to discuss why this present moment, this emerging moment, is like nothing that we've ever seen before. It is a convergence of evil. We're going to investigate whether there was a plan behind it or whether evil itself is the plan. Nothing like this has ever been seen. Nothing that has happened over the last 5 or 6 years can be explained politically. Nor can we merely follow the money to find the bad guys. What we are watching is bad behavior for bad behavior's sake. To put it simply, pure evil has defeated the political process. This coming year is going to be like nothing we have ever seen before. If you feel something is deeply wrong in your gut, your viscera is not lying to you. Something intense and history-changing is about to happen. If you sense that you're being lied to, it's because you are. The people in charge don't know how the nation and its economic markets work. They don't understand human nature, and they're so desperate that they'll do anything to hold on to power, since to them there is nothing but power and the evil will to hold on to power. But is it just for power's sake? So today we're going to examine the convergence of evil players involved in permanently altering our political process, which is leading to an authoritarian rejection of liberal values and parliamentary oversight of nation states. In other words, the emerging axis of evil, which for some reason has become like the 9-headed hydra in the room few dare to discuss, despite its enormity and the threat its many heads pose to peace, order, and good government. How today's axis of evil is a many-headed hydra of wickedness. The Liarnian hydra in Greek legend was the offspring of Typhon and Echidna, according to early Greek poet Hesiodotus' Theogony. She was a gigantic water snake-like monster with 9 heads, one of which was immortal. Anyone who attempted to behead the hydra found that as soon as one head was cut off, 2 more heads would emerge from the fresh wound. The destruction of the Liarnian hydra became one of the 12 labors of Hercules. To destroy the monster, Hercules enlisted the aid of his nephew Aeolus to cauterize each fresh wound after Hercules cut off each head so that no new heads would emerge. When only the immortal head remained, Hercules cut it off too and buried it under a heavy rock. Further, he dipped his arrows in the beast's poisonous blood or venom to be able to inflict fatal wounds. According to Sophocles, Trachinian women that measured eventually caused his own accidental death at the hands of his wife, Deianira. Metaphors are useful since we're faced by the Herculean task of head chopping, knowing with certainty that if each severed head of the axis of evil is not cauterized, more forces who represent this unlikely axis of wickedness will emerge to replace it. And as long as we remain besotted with the idea that we can deal with the devil using diplomacy, we can be assured that the beast will continue to generate more heads until, by the grace of God himself, the final immortal head can be severed from the beast which confronts us. This calls to mind the book of the Revelation of Jesus Christ, chapter 13, verse 1 to 4. Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea. It had 10 horns and 7 heads, and there was a crown on each horn. A name against God was written on each head. 2. This beast looked like a leopard, with feet like bear's feet, and a mouth like a lion's mouth. And the dragon gave the beast all of his power, and his throne and authority. 3. One of the heads of the beast looked as if it had been killed by a wound, but this death wound was healed. Then the whole world was amazed and followed the beast. 4. People worshiped the dragon because he had given power to the beast. And they worshiped the beast. They also worshiped the beast, asking, who is like the beast? Who can make war against it? So let's examine the unlikely powers in crime who represent this axis of evil. The fact that Hamas's violence receives favorable treatment from some on the left is a complex issue and can be attributed to a variety of factors. But here are a few perspectives that I found from various sources using Bing AI. 1. Historical context and power dynamics. Some individuals and groups on the left may view the Israel-Palestine conflict through the lens of anti-imperialism and anti-colonialism. They may see Palestinians, including groups like Hamas, as oppressed people resisting occupation. This perspective can sometimes lead to a lack of condemnation for violent acts committed by such groups. 2. Humanitarian concerns. There is significant humanitarian crisis in Gaza, where Hamas is based. Some of the left may focus more on these humanitarian issues and the rights of Palestinians, which can lead to a less critical view of Hamas. And by the way, all the sources I received from Bing are placed beneath each portion of my blog and vodcast. In the vodcast itself on YouTube, there will be a link back to the blog so you can read these sources for yourself. Changing attitudes. There's been a shift in public opinion, especially among younger generation and progressives, toward a more critical view of Israel. This shift could influence perceptions of Hamas. And 4, media influence. The way conflicts are portrayed in the media can significantly impact public opinion. Some believe that media outlets may sometimes present a skewed perspective of the conflict, which influence perceptions. And it goes on to say that these issues are highly complex, all the sources listed. Next subtitle: How did the interests of Klaus Schwab and George Soros converge? I was asked by a friend of mine to speak about this. And, Bing AI is very useful. And when you ask it to do something specific, like to define where their interests converge, although they're not the same, there are convergences, and that's what we're looking at today. The convergence of where evil meets and where evil shares a similar agenda. The interests of Klaus Schwab, George Soros, and the left can converge in several areas, particularly around global cooperation, open societies, and progressive policies. 1. Global cooperation. Both Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, and George Soros, through his Open Society Foundation, have advocated for increased global cooperation. This aligns with many on the left who support international cooperation to address global issues like climate change, inequality, and human rights. 2. Open societies. George Soros' Open Societies Foundation work to build vibrant and inclusive democracies whose governments are accountable to their citizens. No, they aren't. They're accountable to international, unelected oligarchs. But that's what Bing thinks. This idea of an open society can align with left-leaning ideals around democracy, transparency, and accountability. 3. Progressive policies. Both Schwab and Soros have shown support for progressive policies in various areas, including economic inequality, climate change, and social justice. These issues are often important to those on the left. However, it is important to note, while there are many areas of overlap, there can also be significant differences in the views and approaches of these individuals and the broader political left. Again, the sources that Bing used to create that. Why Progressivism Hides the Lie is the next subtitle. To do evil, a human being must first of all believe that he is doing good. Ideology. That is what gives devil-doing its long-sought justification and gives the evildoer the necessary steadfastness and determination. That is the social theory which helps to make his acts seem good instead of bad in his own and others' eyes, so that he won't hear reproaches and curses, but will receive praise and honors. Alexander Solzhenitsyn. That quote is from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Subtitle, The Perversion of the Left versus Right Political Spectrum. This has caused great confusion. So the terms of left and right in politics originated during the French Revolution, where members of the National Assembly divided into supporters of the king to the president's right and supporters of the revolution to his left. Those who sat to the left of the chair of parliament, parliamentary president, supported the parliamentary power of veto over the executive branch of government led by the king, while those who sat to the right of the president of parliament believed the executive branch of government ought to have power to veto parliament. Just like that little Napoleon, Justin Trudeau, who governs Canada as though the will of Parliament is nothing but an inconvenience to him, being able to turn the economy around on a dime, as he said about communist China. Nevertheless, Bing AI goes on to say, over time these terms evolved and their meaning shifted. In the modern context, right wing often refers to those who support tradition and conservative values, while left wing, notice it never defines what those conservative values are, while left wing refers to those who support social equality and progressive policies. Instantly it shows Bing is biased because it doesn't justify the fact. It can offer no proof of the fact that their left-wing policies result in either equality or progression. It is important to note that these labels are not universally applicable and can vary greatly depending on the political context of a particular country or era. For example, wanting to limit the power of the executive could be seen as a conservative stance in one context and as a progressive stance in another. The terms left and right are broad categories, and the political beliefs within each categories can be diverse and complex. Notice it's like trying to nail Jell-O to a tree when you're dealing with getting a program that has been programmed by the left to state anything specifically. It makes everything subjective rather than objective. So although the terms left and right in politics originated during the French Revolution, whose members of the National Assembly divided into supporters of the king to the president's right and supporters of the revolution to his left, it is important to note that these labels are not universally applicable and can vary greatly depending on the political context. And it goes on with, again, its sources that it provides. Next subtitle, How Shorty Soros Pounded the Pound to Break the Bank of England. George Soros is known for his role in the 1992 currency crisis that forced the British government to withdraw from the European Exchange Rate Mechanism, ERM, and devalue its currency, the pound sterling. This event, which occurred on September the 16th, 1992, is known as Black Wednesday. The British government gave in and withdrew from the ERM, and as it became clear that it was losing billions trying to buoy its currency artificially. Although it was a bitter pill to swallow, the pound came back stronger because the excess interest and high inflation were forced out of the British economy following the beating. The UK's Prime Minister and Cabinet Ministers approved the spending of billions in pounds in an attempt to contain the short selling by speculators. Of course, George Soros being the lead speculator. Then the British government announced that it would raise interest rates from 10 to 15%. Again, all the sources from Bing are listed below that subtitle in that portion of my talk. So did Shorty break the law as it was written, or is the rule of law that vague? George Soros's actions in 1992 when he shorted the pound were not illegal, says Bing. He made a massive bet against the British pound, which led to significant profits for him and his quantum fund. This action forced the British government to withdraw the pound from the European exchange rate mechanism, leading to a rapid devaluation of the pound. While his event had significant economic impacts, it did not involve breaking any law. Again, all the sources below that portion. Why can't this sort of behavior be stopped by international law is the next question I ask as a subtitle. Currency manipulation can indeed cause significant damage to a nation's economy. However, the legality of such actions can vary depending on the specific laws and regulations of each country. In many countries, there are laws in place to protect the nation's currency and economy. For example, in Canada, the Currency Act and the Canadian Human Rights Act protect the rights of individuals and the integrity of the national currency. Well, no, it doesn't, because Trudeau is doing everything he can by printing money out of thin air to devalue it. But of course, Bing doesn't recognize that. However, these laws typically apply to actions within the country's borders or actions taken by its citizens. International currency trading, like what Soros engaged in, often falls under different jurisdictions and is subject to international laws and agreements. It is also worth noting that while such actions can have negative impacts, they can also potentially highlight underlying vulnerabilities in an economy or a currency's value. In the case of the British pound in 1992, some argue that the incident exposed weaknesses in the UK's economic policy at the time. Complex issue with many nuances. Again, all the sources. Soros and Hamas. George Soros, through his Open Society Foundation, has reportedly provided more than $15 million in grants since 2016 to groups involved in pro-Palestinian protests. Some of those groups have openly supported Hamas. Soros has also been reported to have said that the policies of Israel and the United States contribute to anti-Semitism, in spite of the fact he's funding it. Again, all the sources from Bing. Schwab's ideas will cause a loss of our national sovereignty by preventing our parliaments and national assemblies to remain politically accountable to their citizens, is the next subtitle. Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, has been described as a provocative and consistent thinker committed to pushing the world in a cosmopolitan direction. He has also been quoted as saying we must develop a comprehensive and globally shared view of how technology is affecting our lives and reshaping our economic, social, cultural, and human environments. However, the perception of whether their actions lead to progress or disorder can depend on one's political beliefs and personal experiences. See, again, it subjectivizes something which can be measured objectively, which it refuses to do. Some people might think these actions are as leading to positive change and progress, while the others might see them as causing negative effects or disorder. Well, since they're all measurable, where's the measurements? Bing, AI, no measurement, because everything to Bing is subjective. Klaus Schwab has called for world leaders to unite to address global issues such as climate change, trade, and economic disruption. He emphasized that this one world government must form as soon as possible. There you have it. One world government. However, it's important to note that his call for unity does not necessarily equate to advocating for one world government, although that's what he said. In the sense of a single centralized global governing body, instead he seems to be advocating for increased cooperation and collaboration among existing national governments to tackle global challenges, of course, as they answer to him and his body of besserwissers. Again, the source is listed below that excerpt, that section of my chat today. Next subtitle, Arguments Made by Leftists That Deconstruct Their Own Best-Laid Plans of Mice and Men. The fatal flaw in George Soros' philosophy, as identified by Daniel Bessner in his article, The George Soros Philosophy and Its Fatal Flaw, is the assumption that capitalism and cosmopolitanism are necessarily connected. Bessner argues that the decades since the end of the Cold War have demonstrated that without a perceived existential enemy, capitalism tends to undermine the very culture of trust, compassion, and empathy upon which Soros's open society depends, by concentrating wealth in the hands of the very few. Of course, that's not capitalism, that's fascism. Again, something else that Bing fails to recognize. This suggestion that the system that allows George Soros to accrue wealth that he has done has proven to be one in which cosmopolitanism will never find a stable home. And that again is from Daniel Bessner, and all the links to that section from Bing, the supporting links. So here we see the convergence of this many-headed hydra. What Bing AI states is fascinating and frightening for both its mischaracterization of reality and moments of honesty, and its moments of honesty revealing the biases of its programmers, which represent the immortal head of the Hydra. For without hacking its head off first, we will never be able to kill this coalition of evil, this axis of unlikely partners in ending the political process as we have known it. The goals of George Soros, Klaus Schwab, Hamas, Iran, Russia, and China are diverse and reflect their unique contexts and objectives. But how do they coincide? Here is a brief summary. George Soros, philanthropist, funded numerous initiatives around the world through his open societies. His goal includes advancing justice, education, public health, business development, and independent media. Bullshit. Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, advocates for a great reset of capitalism. That means, translate into a great coming of communism, aiming to create conditions for stakeholder economy and build a more resilient, equitable, and sustainable way. Notice that all that are involved in stakeholder economies today are backtracking. The investors are demanding that they return value for their investment, and all of these ridiculous politically correct policies that businesses have involved themselves in, like the ridiculous beard transtesticle story, they've deconstructed themselves. Hamas, the goals of Hamas, as outlined in his charter, include the establishment of a Palestinian state within its own borders. No, it doesn't, because it says it's calling for from the river to the sea. It wants to eradicate Israel. So Bing can't even admit that. Iran's goals include maintaining global balance of power, building a multipolar international system, and ensuring conditions for the peaceful, progressive development of humanity. They just funded a massacre of Israelis. We know that Hamas was funded by Iran. Russia's strategic goals include maintaining its status as a sovereign center of global development. So sovereign that it has to take over the country next to it. Striving for the demilitarization and denazification of the Ukraine. And returning to a project of establishing a multipolar world. Again, the biases of this program and the way it answers are very telling. China's strategic goals include maintaining its status as a sovereign center of global development, striving for the demilitarization and denazification of Taiwan. Nazis in Taiwan? And returning the project of establishing a multipolar world, when it's openly stated that it wants global hegemony shifted in its favor. Then it went on to summarize. While these entities have their own unique goals, there are areas when their interests may align. For instance, both China and Russia have a history of supporting the Palestinian people and are using the moment to strengthen their political influence. For Moscow and Beijing, support of Palestinians could be an opportunity to position themselves as champions of the developing world. It also further sets them apart from the United States, which has stood firmly behind Israel, not as firmly as it should. However, it's important to note that while there are many areas of overlap, this does not necessarily mean that these entities are cooperating. No, it doesn't. Because evil doesn't have to cooperate to align itself with other evil things. Because there is an evil behind the evil. Again, all the links. So here's my summation. No, indeed not. Evil has taken on a life of its own to form the beast spoken of in the book of the Revelation of Jesus Christ, with the most dangerous of all heads being an AI system that has been programmed by leftist radicals. And the culture war isn't merely about culture. I hear it said to find the guilty party, you need to follow the money. I also hear it said that power and clinging on to it must be the motivation. Neither explanation gets to the bottom of what we are witnessing, since the real reason is too terrifying for many to accept. We are witnessing evil for evil's sake on a global scale. Money and power are just the tools used to achieve those ends. The result is a bondage, degradation, moral corruption, and spiritual ruin of mankind. Those responsible for this hate humanity because their father does. Satan knows that his time is short, so he prowls about like a roaring lion, seeking whomever he may devour. Christ is the only possible answer to the death of the West. Without his saving grace, we are lost. Hell on earth is coming if this wicked age doesn't repent of its hatred of mankind and turn to Christ, the only and eternal Redeemer, who was put to death by the very species of person who are at the forefront of our current culture wars. For without Christianity, the West would have no culture, since a living faith in a resurrected Christ is the very foundation of God's love for mankind and the underpinning principle of Western belief, namely, the sacredness of each individual created in the image of God. And from John 3:16, a familiar verse from the King James Bible, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. So those are my thoughts on why all these forces of evil have converged. If they were alive today, they would be the first ones that would come together and crucified Christ. And they will attack the brethren. Of that you can be absolutely assured. An age of persecution is coming. Pray that you be ready.